Hi, good morning, Sec 2 students. This is Mr. Xiao, and in this video, I want to go through the explain essay skill. For those of you who missed any of my lessons, or those of you who want a bit more guidance on how to do the essay. So again, we go back to our chapter 6 notes. We'll be looking at the Japanese occupation for the past 4 weeks now. We said that the Japanese occupation started after the fall of Singapore in 1942, and we said that we wanted to find out. Our inquiry for this chapter is, what did the people of Singapore experience during the Japanese occupation? How did they feel? What made them feel this way? Why did they feel in certain ways? So let's go to the first explained essay, which is on page 2. Our setup was that the people in Singapore would have been frustrated, angry about the fall of Singapore because, of course, the country is now under a foreign power's occupation. The people of Singapore would also have been a bit scared, terrified, and apprehensive because the Japanese were known to be cruel in China. And the people would have felt a bit regretful and disappointed that the British didn't manage to defend the island as they had so proudly claimed, as they had, boasted once about the Gibraltar of the East. So this heady mix of negative feelings would have sort of swarmed Singapore people at the moment of the fall. And clearly disappointed, angry, and upset people are not going to support the new power, Japan. So Japan had to gain control over Singapore, and the strategies were to use force and win loyalty. So this is the problem facing Japan. How do I get control over this potentially rebellious island in the shortest amount of time? And the first method that we talked about was using force. So when we look at a question like this, how did the Japanese use force to gain control over Singapore? The actual explain question you would see in an exam would look like this. It would look like, explain how the Japanese use force to gain control. This would be the actual exam question if I were to set it this way. And the command word would be explain, which means that you will need to show me your understanding of this question and its focus. And what is the question focus? Pause if you want to think about it. What is the question focus? It's actually using force to gain control over Singapore. This focus has to emerge at some point in your answers. So we did a lot of group work in class. I'm pretty sure I did group work for all classes using this box. So let me recap. There are 4 components to an explain essay. So an explain essay would be done using 4 components, right? That is the point, that is the evidence, that is the explanation, and that's the link. So if you don't have this on the post-it, you should definitely write it down now. Explain essay, that's the point, that's the evidence, and we use the words for example. That's the explanation, and we use the words as a result. And furthermore, and that's the link, which we just say thus. We put the point back in here, and put the question focus back in here. So this is the structure of an explain essay, or which we will sometimes know as PU. point, evidence, explanation, link. Again, if you need to, write this down on a post-it. You can stick it in your textbook, in your notes. You have to have it somewhere. And so let's look at this list as this box. You'll realize that I've actually structured an explained essay for you vertically downwards. That this whole thing would be, for example, one explained essay. What does that mean? Okay. So you know that we need the point, the evidence, the explanation, and the link. If you were to look at it carefully, right, this whole row is a point. So can you, okay, I can't really do this on a Google Doc, but you should draw a squiggly line here, a squiggly line, and right here, point, P-O-I-N-T. This whole row are points. Explain how the Japanese used force to gain control over Singapore. My point would be, one way the Japanese used force was to mete out harsh punishments. Another way the Japanese used force, right, my point, another way the Japanese used force was to identify and purge potential enemies. So the point is actually your ATQ. You need to answer the question, plus the main idea. It's the ATQ plus the main idea. How did the Japanese use force to gain control? One way, to mete out harsh punishments. Second way, to purge enemies. Third way, to coerce the Chinese businessmen. Right? Your point is the starting line of every new argument. And each argument has its own paragraph. So let me write it out for you so you could see how I would answer this question using the box. Explain how the Japanese. I'm going to start. My essay would look like this. Japanese use force when meting out harsh punishments. For example, to put an end to looting, the Japanese executed looters and displayed their chopped off heads publicly. Human heads were hung at open areas, such as the Cathay building and near the Singapore River. Up to this point, it shouldn't be a problem. I just explained to you that the point is your ATQ plus ATQ, Japanese use force by, plus your main idea, meting out harsh punishments, right? So this is your point. And I said that, for example, blah, 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 that's your evidence. I have some knowledge about this harsh punishment. An example I have is looting. And when people are looting, they get executed, their heads get chopped off, and the heads are hung at the Cathay building and Singapore River. This is my evidence. This is some historical knowledge I know. And this historical knowledge really illustrates the point. At this stage, the essay is not an explained essay. At this stage, the essay is a described essay. I've described the harsh punishments that the Japanese meted out, which are the execution of looters and the hanging of heads in open areas. I still need to explain. To explain, I need to hit the focus. We talked about the focus. We said it's gain control over Singapore. Oh, you really need to always highlight the question focus when you see this, because it always ends up with the question focus. Thus, the Japanese use force meter out harsh. This is the link. This is the final stage of the essay. The link is telling me that I need to hit the question focus at some point. I need to hit this. So what is missing here in the middle is the explanation. How do we do the explanation? We said explanation as a result furthermore. So we are going to start as a result furthermore. Okay, so set 2s, at this point, everything I've said is something that you would have learned in set 1. But this part is the new skill. This part is the explain. How am I going to explain? Explanation is going from the point and evidence, the harsh punishments and the chopping and the looting, going from this to the focus, which is control. So how am I going to explain is I'm going to use my brain. I'm going to think, okay, harsh punishments. What happens because of harsh punishments that leads to control over Singapore? This linkage is the explanation. So let's think about it. How would harsh punishments lead to control over Singapore? Well, by seeing the chopped off head and executed people, would people be confident to continue stealing and looting? No, right? They will become very obedient. So by doing harsh punishments, people would scrupulously obey the law. When people obey the law, is there more order or disorder, confusion? There will be more order and less confusion and less messiness. And with more order and more regularity, the Japanese have control. Everyone is obeying the rules, right? So as a result, people would want to obey the laws, and which would increase the amount of public order in Singapore, which made it easier for the Japanese to rule the country. This is one explanation. Let's try another one. And the other one is actually even easier. What's the other explanation? Furthermore, harsh punishments would lead to what? Lead to what? By seeing the chopped off heads. Would lead to fear. It would lead to fear. People would be fearful of Japanese soldiers. People would want to or would never want to go against the Japanese, and so they have control. And that's it. There's no resistance. So furthermore, let me change this to a different color so that it's easier for you all to see the explanations. Furthermore, the violence of the Japanese would instill fear in the local people, which made them compliant and avoid going against the Japanese, firmly establishing Japanese authority. Or this firmly established. And now we are done. Okay. Let me remove these two thinking points. This is how we were thinking about explanation. Now we are done. Let's look at it. Explain how the Japanese used force to gain control over Singapore. One way was to mete out harsh punishments. For example, to end looting, human heads were hung in open areas, they were chopped off, and people saw these heads hung around. And by seeing all these punishments and these scary violence of the Japanese, firstly, people want to obey the law, which increased the organization and order in Singapore, make it very orderly and rule based. So the Japanese, while ruling the country, have a much smoother time to maintain this control. Secondly, because the Japanese are so violent, people don't want to step on the Japanese toes. They are very compliant and they avoid resisting. And now the Japanese have all the power. And thus, the harsh punishments meted out by the Japanese help them gain control. That's it. This is an explained essay. And this would be here. Here, going down vertically here, right? These were my explanation points. Reducing the amount of crime and disorder, causing the brutal punishments inspired terror and reduced the disobedience, and thus causing the Japanese to gain control. Can you see, Sec 2s? Your point is in this row, evidence, explanation, and link. And can you see that very importantly, my explanations are always going from my point and evidence to the question focus. I always want to end up with control. So how do I end up with control? By starting with punishments. I need to think of the logical reasoning chain, the chain of causation that goes from punishments to control. Okay, I don't want to belabor the point, so let me help you out with some of the blanks, so that you can do your homework efficiently. So let me start with this blank. Coercing the Chinese businessman. So the Japanese used force to gain control over Singapore. One way the Japanese used force was to coerce the Chinese businessman. They created the Overseas Chinese Association, which gave money. As a result, right, firstly, the Chinese businessman was starved of funds and could not secretly support the resistance, weakening the resistance. Which we see the Chinese hate the Japanese. If the Chinese have no money, they can't resist, and the Japanese have more control because the resistance is weak. That's one explanation. Furthermore, the Japanese, right? If the Chinese have less money, where does this money go? It goes to the Japanese. So the Japanese have more money to support Camp Petai operations, to catch the resistance, and thus increase their own power. Right? With this money, now the Camp Petai is stronger, more efficient, catch the resistance, we get more power. If you need to, pause and copy these explanations. But in general, I believe for most of my Sec 2 classes, I have gone through this in class. So this is really for those who missed any lessons and didn't have these explanations. Okay, I'm going to jump to the next one. Let's look at this question, winning loyalty. How did the Japanese win loyalty to gain control over Singapore? Again, what's the question focus? Yeah, it's gain control over Singapore. You are getting it. You are getting it. And I had one whole argument for you already set up here. The first argument, the Japanese use propaganda to gain control. For example, Japanese talk about the freeing Asia from colonial rule, the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. They talk about Asia for the Asians. They use posters and radio. And so the people in Singapore are now inspired. They think that Japanese are noble, want to save them, and so they want to support Japan. Okay, and then therefore Japanese get control. And furthermore, maybe the people feel like Asian rulers are better after all. Asians would treat them with equality, and so propaganda help win the Japanese support from the local people that increase their control. Fine. What else? Benefits. Benefits. So the Japanese won loyalty by providing benefits. Benefits. What are these benefits? They gave schooling and housing, right? And then the school textbooks were given to 20,000 students, right? So I did this in class for some classes. This was homework for other classes. But I believe finding these answers in the textbook would not have been too challenging. The real challenging part would have been this. Now you need to scratch your head. Having gotten these benefits, sugar, salt, rice for Hari Raya Puasa, or schooling and accommodation, how did this lead to Japanese control? So in your head or on your paper, or no matter how you think about it, you should always have this sort of causal link. You should always have this like benefits. You should always be thinking like that. Because what links your point plus evidence to your focus is precisely the explanation. So you really need to think about what goes into this question mark. How do I go from the benefits to control? That's the explanation. Let me pause the video and think about it on your own. Read your answer now. Does it make sense? Does it make sense? Does it go from the evidence to the explanation, which is to the focus, which is thus providing benefits? Did you get this right? Did you manage to get to the focus? Okay. I hope you got the chance to read. Now let me go through one potential answer. So one potential answer in my head, as a result, with all these benefits, the public felt that the Japanese were effective rulers and a good government, and were happy to support the Japanese, which increased their control over Singapore. Another reason, potentially, furthermore, those who were desperate for food um and food and education might defect to secretly support the Japanese such as by spying for them, which increase Japanese power over the country. Right? So they get more spies, and they get public support. And these are explanations for how the benefits, which increase public support, the benefits, which lead them to get more spies, increase their control. So over here, our explanation would have been benefits lead to public admiration and support for Japan's rule. Right? This could be explanation one. And over here, explanation two was lead to more desperate locals become spies and supporters, informers for the Japanese. It will show off your knowledge, Kanpeitai. Explanation two. And with more spies and more information, they get control. This is how you think about explanation to H4, 5, 6, 7. You are thinking about going from the point and evidence to the focus. Okay. Try do one more box. Okay, I'll do one more box and then I'll wrap this up. Here. Why were the people's lives threatened? Okay. So for this question, if I were to rephrase this as an explain question, it would be actually just explain why the people's lives were threatened. This is an explain question, 6 marks. What's the focus? People's lives were threatened under Japanese rule. This. I need to explain this. So, disease. Disease had caused mass suffering. I've always disease like pneumonia, dysentery. I think this is beriberi, right? Okay. Lost to the death railway. Was it death railway? So as a result, poor living conditions cause rapid spread of illness and sickness, which affected many more people and led to their deaths. Right? If you live in very cramped conditions, the disease will spread very fast. Furthermore, the overwork, the people were overworked by the Japanese. People who were overworked by the Japanese were were weaker and more susceptible to illness and ran a higher risk of dying, mortality. Right? So one thing is the poor living conditions cause the rapid spread, illness spread. Another is that if you keep forcing them to work so hard, they are weak, their bodies are weak, and then they catch the sickness faster. And so in both cases, thus diseases and poor conditions is the focus, let the people's life be threatened under the Japanese. So at this point, Sec 2s, I have done 3 different explain questions with you. The first one I really went through in great detail, and the second and third one I sped it, but I sped it because you already know how it's done. I hope you tried these questions on your own. Please copy down the suggested answers if you feel your answers are not good enough, and you should also write exactly in the paragraphs downwards with 2 explanations for all the essays that are on page 10 or on page 9 and 10. So these are your chance to practice writing essays, because these are sort of the questions that you will see in your assessment. Okay, so I've covered the explain essay in great detail in this video. I hope it makes sense to you. And if you need to, you can come and find me for consult by booking on the Calendly link. So I think you're familiar that we have a consult page where you can click on this link, and then you can book the timings you want. So if you need consult, please come find me. If you need to watch this video again, please go and watch it. If you need to ask your friends for help, please do so and discuss how to do the explain essay, because this skill is taught already and I won't be focusing so much on this in class in the future. Okay, have a good time, Sec 2s. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next week.